Hey everyone, welcome back to another live edition of Taking Stock. I'm Jermaine McDonald from Learn Grow Invest, and I'm sitting in for Kalilah tonight. And we're here to bring you all the latest business news and telling you how it will affect you and your money. So the lullabies have been getting a bit quieter in Jamaica. Fewer babies are being born today, marking a 20-year low. So we're going to talk about the effects of this on society and the economy. But before we do that, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let me know in the comments where you are joining us from. So here's a look at what's coming up tonight, what's coming up in tonight's show, followed by what's hot in business. And come on, let's get this money.
On this episode of Taking Stock, could Jamaica be on the brink of a baby boom? We explore the reasons behind the country's declining population and potential solutions. And the Analyst weighs in on the latest market developments. Guyana has become the third largest economy in the English-speaking Caribbean. What has fueled their rise to the top three? We'll discuss.
Here's what's hot, brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
The government's plan to ban ride-sharing apps in Jamaica is currently on pause, as the island's telecommunications companies have put up resistance to the request. Transport Minister Darrell Vaz said both of the island's main telecoms providers have indicated an unwillingness to block the apps because there is no legislation in place. Given the company's refusal to play ball, the minister said no ban is currently in place on ride-sharing services. He said the government will allow ride-sharing companies to continue operations while the regulatory framework is developed. NCB Financial Group has sold its majority stake in the Bermuda-based Clarion Group to Cornerstone Financial Holdings. The sale will reduce NCBFG's stake in Clarion Group from 50.1% to 19.9%. Clarion Group is the parent company of Clarion Bank, which is located in Bermuda and deals with community banking, investment management, and trust administration. The deal would also be Cornerstone's first international acquisition. NCBFG CEO Robert Almeida said the move was a part of the company's ongoing efforts to reallocate capital effectively. NCB's recent APO brought in $2.5 billion of capital, which was only half of the desired $5 billion. Mayberry Jamaican Equities says due to overwhelming demand, it is upsizing and extending the closing date of its current bond offer. Originally scheduled to close on June 7, the offer is now set to close on June 21. According to the company's prospectus, the offer can be upsized by an additional $3.3 billion. The bonds are being issued in three tranches. The first tranche has a dividend payout interest rate of 9.25% and matures in 13 months. Tranche 2 matures in 26 months and has a 10% interest rate. Tranche 3 matures in 36 months and has an interest rate of 10.5%. The minimum subscription for this offer is 20,000 Jamaican dollars. Just 3 years after oil production and exportation started in Guyana, the country has become the third largest economy in the English-speaking Caribbean. According to a report published by former governor of the Central Bank of Barbados, Kalilah World, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica currently hold the number 1 and number 2 spots respectively. Guyana's 2022 gross domestic product came in at $15 billion, which is half of Trinidad and Tobago's $30 billion and 12% less than Jamaica's $16.2 billion. The U.S. Federal Reserve held its interest range steady last week at 5.25 to 5.5%. Fed Chair Jerome Powell also indicated that the agency has pushed back the start of rate cuts to as late as December. The Fed says that growth and unemployment in the U.S. are still at levels better than the central bank thinks is sustainable in the long run. Powell said policymakers are content to leave rates where they are until the economy signals that something else is needed, whether that be a more convincing decline in price pressures or a jump in the unemployment rate.
To step up social media marketing for your business, get ready for the Summer Social Splash. Be one of the first 10 companies to sign up and get 60% off our influencer promotion package featuring yours truly. I'll come to your business and highlight your product or service to over 300,000 followers on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. But only 10 spots are available and it's first come, first serve. So don't wait too long to book this special offer. It's 60% off for the summer. Contact business@moneymediaja.com or call 876-498-6490 today. Let's get this money.
All right, welcome back. Let's see where everyone is joining us from tonight. So Dwight Jackson from St. Anne's Bay in the house. Kish, I know Kish was here a while now. Good evening, Kish. Nana Sense, so watching from far, far, far away. So Kish is from London. Erd Natty is from St. Andrew. I'm actually in St. Andrews as well, so we're probably close. And Deshaun is from Negril. So I was in Negril a couple of weeks ago. So really, really interesting town. And Christopher Shaw said good night from Kingston, checking in. And Kimoy is saying, watching from NYC, happy to see Jermaine hosting. Well, thank you. This is my third time, and I think I'm the most comfortable I've been. So let's hope that shows as well. And Shardine says St. Thomas checking in. Christopher John says Portmore in the building. Let's get this money. And I think we can take one more. And Michael says Atlanta. So I've really wanted to go to Atlanta. So Michael, probably you should message me. I want to know like flights, where to stay, etc. So let's see how that goes. All right. So thanks to everyone for joining. Again, remember to like this video. It really helps the channel. All right, so baby bust is impacting Jamaica's population, but could this decline actually lead to a baby boom somewhere down the line? So Economist Keenan Falconer joins us to unpack the possibilities of this. So we touched on it last week in our poll, and the responses were quite interesting. So now we welcome Keenan to join us on screen. Keenan, how are you doing?
Hi, Jermaine. How are you doing? And good night to all your viewers, or whatever time it might be in the world, depending on your location. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's start, since this is your first time on the show, let's start with a little bit about your background. So tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm an economist by profession. I currently am a civil servant in government. I've worked across government and multilateral sector, as well as academia, Ministry of Finance, Bank of Jamaica, International Monetary Fund. My specialty really is public financial management, public sector management. I have an interest mostly in fiscal economics, and my career has spanned maybe the last 5 to 7 years. So yeah, I also have an interest in social protection and even things like this, what we're discussing now here tonight, demography, public policy, and statistics, and so on.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're the perfect person for us to have this conversation with. So thank you again for being here. So we faced a low birth rate problem with the total number of live births in the country declining sharply over the last 20 years. Are you surprised by this development?
No, definitely, absolutely not. Based on the trend, our birth rates have been declining since the 1970s. Everybody of a certain vintage can remember 2 is better than too many. And then the National Population Policy was introduced in 1983. And funnily enough, just the other day, I discovered some information that one of the main reasons why since 1983, the birth rate had been going down in Jamaica was because when news broke of the AIDS epidemic, contraceptive usage had increased, especially among males. People were afraid of catching this thing, which at the time persons were very worried about, couldn't explain what was happening. And then since then, the trend has really continued up to the early 2000s. And I know, as we see, it's a 20-year low. But at our stage of development, I just want to say that having a low birth rate is not fundamentally the problem. Many developed countries get to that point where birth rates start to trend downwards, and it's really a sign mostly of their stage of development. But the issue fundamentally is that we are below the replacement rate, right, at 1.9. So, we need to have at least 2.1 in order to replace the population overall. And many countries are grappling with that problem, developing countries alike. The highest birth rates that you might find in the world now are in Africa, where you still have some countries, women on average are having 4 to 6 children per woman. But the general trend for the last 10, 15, 20 years has been a very steady decline. You've got other countries in the world, they have tried everything you can think of. They've run the full gamut of cash incentives, more affordable childcare, tax credits, birth bonuses, child benefits, assisted reproductive technology, and things like that. And it hasn't moved the needle much. So the problem of low birth rate has to be really looked at from a different angle. Why is it that persons now are just not having children? And you can look at the fact that the opportunity cost is even higher. No people realize.
Well, I was going to ask you though, is it anything specific culturally or economic, which it sounds like you're about to get into, that might add to this? Because the truth is, when I think about, so I view kind of growing up different circles, right? When you're single, you have like a circle of friends, you work towards your career, etc. But once you start working, it feels like the focus is to advance in your career. Most people plan out most of their weeks. So you're working or working late or working weekends. And so I feel like it's maybe a career focus that leads people to maybe either subconsciously not necessarily focus on the family planning part. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on any cultural or economic factors that you think would lead to this specifically.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of the reason. It's not just, can't identify just one reason for it. Persons have been focusing more on career. The reasons could also be philosophical. People just don't believe that they need to have children. When you look at time use studies, for example, persons indicate that they could do so much more with their time if they don't have any children. And we know that process of child rearing is very intensive and very time consuming for a lot of people. So persons now realize that in freeing up that time, they can probably get more out of their personal and professional lives. And of course, as you said, persons focusing on their careers. Now, as well, persons don't really have a need to have children. In the past, persons felt that they needed to have children for various reasons. Many of them economic. Some of them said that I need to have a child because I want to rely on them for my pension, basically, in my elder years. And that sentiment has gradually eroded over time. So things like that, shifting attitudes overall, I think, has partially accounted for it. On the economic side, however, more recent vintage, I subscribe largely to the view that persons are not having children simply because the gap between incomes and wages relative to the cost of living has so widened. In the past, for example, buying a house, it used to be that the average cost of a house was maybe 1 to 3 times the average income, and now that has widened to be somewhere in the order of maybe 7 to 10 times. And just thinking about the stable family unit, if you don't even have the basic unit, which is the house, then persons aren't going to really consider having children because that is more discretionary now. I don't have to have children to make my personal economic situation possibly harder. But in terms of the wider macroeconomic effects of a low birth rate, you start to think about things like making fiscal adjustments. In the future now, if you have fewer people available to be a part of the workforce, then that means less tax collection, possibly less economic activity, less consumption taxes. You think about the fact that pensions now, pension enrollment is already so low that we have had to now consider auto enrollment, and that has been progressing apace, expanding social security. And then you also have other labor market considerations like migration, for example. If you don't have the workforce, we have been talking about it, but that's mostly because there's a dearth of skills. But if you have a dearth of people overall in quantitative terms, then that's another dimension that you have to really consider. But
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, so finish the thought, then I'll go to the next question.
Right. So in terms of incentives, as I was saying earlier, even the most developed countries in the world, the needle has not moved very much. You look at Japan, Singapore, South Korea, they have tried all of those things that I listed earlier in terms of incentives, both monetary and non-monetary. It is harder now to incentivize people to have children as opposed to incentivizing them to not have children. So even countries that prioritize social welfare, like the Scandinavian nations, Norway, Finland, for example, they're still struggling. Birth rates are not going up, they're going in the opposite direction. So the question then becomes really, is providing those incentives in the immediate postnatal period really enough? And I don't think many persons are really swayed by it, because yes, you can be covered for the first 3-6 months, maybe a year after birth, but then what about the 18 years after that? And I think many persons are thinking about life after, immediate birth. And then that now translates into having a stable economic situation, which necessarily means three things: housing, stable employment, and moderating the cost of living. So if you address people's basic needs, they will now tend to see an opening to say, okay, I'm in a better position to now have children because my basic needs are taken care of. If my basic needs are not taken care of, nothing in the way of short-term incentives is going to really push me to have greater children just to meet demographic targets.
Okay. So, it sounds to me, so I know you mentioned a lot of things there, but it sounds to me like you're saying that most persons, or the data may be pointing to most persons saying it simply may just be too expensive when you consider everything based on the fact that the incentives may be there, but it doesn't replace, I guess, the overall lifespan of that responsibility you will have in terms of those expenses. And this is a math that I've worked on with my wife. We did a projection to see how much it will cost us to send our son to school, to university, to cover certain basic things for him over the next 18 years, and that math was just ridiculous for us, right? And I know when I was personally younger, the aspiration was to have at least maybe 3 to 4 children. Rob said in the chat that he's almost 40 and can't afford and just can afford a house. Can't imagine doing that with kids. And I find a lot more persons are saying that, where they're looking at the cost for children, and it's maybe not making sense because of all the other things you mentioned, right? Not having to be able to afford a house. Maybe they're working multiple jobs. And I think there's also the relationship factor, where maybe they're not just finding somebody they would want to raise a family with as well. And I think there's also another factor where that could be an impact, is maybe things like infertility and so on. So I wanted to ask you though, Keenan, does this declining birth rate influence the demand for certain goods or services? What industries may be impacted?
Well, I would say it's really right across the board. Anything that you can think of in terms of consumption is going to be affected. And with fewer people, less revenue from consumption as well. So I don't think there's really any specific sector that will not you know, be impacted by the fact that persons are having fewer children. But even historically, so one of the questions that I was looking at was, can it be a good thing in the Jamaican context? Because for years, people had been saying that Jamaica was overpopulated, and we exceeded our carrying capacity to the point where our resources could not sustain the population that we already have. So the fact that persons are having fewer children ought to mean something positive, at least in that sphere, right? And that's very possible. The fact that you're having fewer children and you're normalizing that population density, but the fact that we're below replacement rate means that at some point the population will start to decline. Not yet, because this population has grown very steadily. It's almost negligible, maybe around the order of 0.1% a year. You talk about 50,000 babies used to be born 20 years ago, and now it's dropped down to 30,000. It's getting closer to the death rate of around 20-something thousand. So the net, and then when you count migration, it's really negative. But the net between births and deaths is around less than 10,000 being added to the population per year. And so when the 60s came around, we used to have like 6 children on average. That's just an average, meaning persons could have double digits per year in the 1960s until it was moderated from the 70s, 80s, 90s to the present. But the opportunity is for us to really now accelerate our economic development. And the best time to do that is when the population is stable, as it is right now, because GDP per capita is still growing very marginally. It's not in leaps and bounds in the way that we would have wanted to, like, let's say $20,000 per person. But if we attempted to do that when the population is exploding, as it had done post World War II, when it was much harder, now is really the opportunity to try to expand our economy in the way that we would want.
So then, this brings me to the next question. So should then the government be doing more? So whereas in the past we had the two is better than too many, should the government actually start encouraging people to have more children?
Well, the government can encourage people to have more children, but how do you go about it? No, I mean, even the National Family Planning Board, as we saw the news the other day, they had been basically a victim of their own success, and they had to now have their operations subsumed into the wider Ministry of Health and Wellness. So clearly the direction being taken is that, it's unnecessary to have those functions being replicated today. But I think there's still a role for family planning in general that can now start to reverse the trend. Still, I don't think it's something that might be achieved in our lifetimes, because these things happen in cycles. When the booms and the bust, the baby boomers post World War II up until around the mid-60s, that 20-year period where populations just exploded. But that was also concomitant with growing economies worldwide, until you started to have a decline in the 1970s onwards. So unless we can now have those two in tandem, we have a good economy and now encouraging people to have more children, I don't see that really happening for the foreseeable future. For the global trend, it's more likely that we'll follow what has been happening internationally, because we're not insulated from the events that take place worldwide. So the population as it stands is expected to continue to rise gradually to about 10 billion by 2050, and then it remains stable until around 2080. Then it starts to decline after that. So we might track very closely to what will happen globally before we can possibly experience a boom of any appreciable or meaningful magnitude.
Okay. So what would you say are the potential long-term implications if things remain the way they are right now?
Well, socially, economically, we would have to start changing the way our economy is ordered. When you have fewer people, it's already harder now, based on our skill set, and the number of people in our workforce to achieve the certain types of development outcomes that we want, with our labor participation rate needing to be a little higher in order to achieve that. But if you don't have the labor, that's going to be slightly impossible. You start to think about migrating, incoming migration of labor, just to continue to fill that gap. Of course, you have the fiscal adjustments that need to be made. If you have fewer people who are working, fewer people remitting taxes to the government, that's less revenue to both on the capital and the recurrent side, just to be able to do projects like that. But that's to say that I don't think it will become so severe where Jamaica is considered underpopulated. Most countries, even though they're below replacement rate, it's still tracking very closely. So it's not like many countries are at one child per woman or less than one child per woman. We're just at 1.9 and the replacement rate is 2.1. So it's more likely that the stability will continue to be there because we're at that level of demographic transition. So it's not a population crisis of sorts where, the population is going to be dropping by 50 or 100,000 per year kind of thing. It's more that we have now basically leveled out at the point where we ought to have been decades ago when we just started to moderate population growth. But now we are, as I said earlier, it presents an opportunity to really burst forward because the fact that we have our population being at the levels, meaning our birth rate at the levels of what developed countries would have, it means that that gives us additional room to be able to pursue certain things without having to worry about trying to bring the birth rate down. That was a very serious problem for even our listeners, some who may have been around that time, some who may have not. It was a hard situation for the government to deal with. When you had on average 6 children per woman being born, and you could not satisfy the productive capacity of the country despite that. And then you had migration as a valve to kind of, ease the population pressure in terms of unemployment. So those are the kinds of social issues that are, we are far removed from that era in our development.
Okay, so my final question for you before we take some comments, what would you say are the opportunities for us to maybe create a more sustainable and equitable society, right? Because we know that there are issues and challenges there. So since we have this situation, how can we take advantage of it, for lack of a better phrase?
Well, I think we have to start to meaningfully address those structural issues that continue to plague us, because that's what is really holding back our growth prospects. We talk about things like crime, corruption, the high cost of energy, or relatively low skill set as a result of suboptimal education outcomes. You talk about things like the cost of doing business, and just overall these problems that have affected us for decades. They're seemingly intractable. These are the constraints to growth that we have not addressed in the better part of our independent years. So now that we have attained over the last decade some level of macro fiscal consolidation that did not exist prior to today, it provides a sound footing for us to now focus on actually getting sustainable development and sort of boosting growth, encouraging new industries to come in, while still keeping our traditional industries. But it's really about wealth generation, revenue generation, and ensuring that development is equitable. So, it's not so concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority are gone without. And since we don't have to focus on necessarily social and public policy issues related to the population, that sort of frees up our efforts to now dedicate it solely towards boosting our wealth by multiples.
Okay. All right, so we do have some comments and I believe one question. So we can take either first. I'll take comments or question, whichever comes up. Okay. So Roswell is saying, yeah, have more children. From an investment view, it would work well for mothers buying lots of Pampers and school time. My company SOS will sell. Lasco will make a nice profit. So Roswell is saying, you know, the more the merrier. The companies on the exchange will benefit from it. Let's take another. Leanne is saying, please remember there's also an issue of infertility. So I had commented on that as well. That is something that, I mean, because I have a personal understanding of it, meaning that's something that my wife and I experienced. It's actually a lot more. I'm trying to remember the statistics. My wife is better at this, but I think what we heard at the time is 1 in 4 couples are infertile. So it's actually it's more of an issue than maybe some persons think. Of course, if you have children, you're not worried about infertility, so you may not know that it's an issue. And I see Orville saying that, making some comments on that. But there are couples who for sure are struggling with that. Orville says infertility is caused by a lack of sufficient nutrients for the body. So Orville, I will say to you, it's caused by multiple things, right? There's also a concept called unexplained infertility, meaning man is okay, woman is okay, but there's just some reason that the two aren't compatible, so to speak, right? And actually, in some cases, a couple maybe trying for children can't have, they separate and they're able to actually conceive with persons outside of that relationship, outside of that marriage. And so there is something called unexplained infertility, right? Just for some education there, right? Orville says crime is also a major factor. I think Gavin had a question. Can we take that for Keenan? See if I can find it here. Gavin was saying, how do we compare to the population situation in Japan?
Well, in terms of birth rates, at least, you know, ours is still a bit higher. I mean, I think Japan is notoriously known for having low birth rates for decades, and their population has been so stable, you know, that even inflation is so low because of very low economic activity. So we compare, I would say, very favorably with Japan, but we are in that region where we now start to rub shoulders with developed countries in terms of our birth rates being at 1.9. You know, look at South Korea, I think it's like 0.7, you know, which is below 1. And that just means that, you know, you can't even half replace the number of children per year. So Japan, South Korea, Singapore, I would say we compare very favorably.
Okay. All right. I believe that's it. Thank you so much, Keenan. Pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jermaine, and all the best.
All right. So I think as it relates to infertility, I see some comments in the chat there. If Kalilah wants to have my wife and I on the show to talk about that, we'd be more than happy to. But I see Renee is actually stating some information there. It's something that, as I said, we've spoken about it, discussed it for many years, and so trust me, it's not as simple as you think. So let's move on. All right, time for our poll question this week. So the question is, what would make you more likely to use Jamaica's CBDC? That's JAM-DEX. So option A, more merchants. B, more digital wallets. C, nothing, I'll never use it. D, I need to learn more about it first. Or E, other, you can leave a comment. All right, so have you guys signed up for the Money Mission community yet? If you haven't, here's a clip for what you've been missing.
I think it's just to be consistent with your investing. You said that you're gonna do the GOJ Treasury bills investment. Your homework, I guess, is to just execute on that and do what you say you're going to do, and don't just drag your feet and never get around to it and end up spending money on something else.
All right. So if you want to learn more about the Money Mission community, the link is in the description. And again, just a reminder to hit the like button. Up next, we've got your market recap, and the analysts are standing by. Market recap. Ready? Okay. All right. So I'm seeing the comments here. So thank you, Rennie, for sharing some context. Yes. So we're again, this feels like maybe not the best episode for this conversation, but while we're getting the clip ready, so Leanne is saying IVF is no guarantee, and she thinks infertility is a condition we need to talk about. So Leanne, I do agree. And again, I don't know if this is the right episode, but again, if Kalilah is interested, we're certainly able to talk about it. I think we're ready to go though. So let's have our market recap now.
The JC Combined Index gained over 1,000 points last week. 126 stocks traded across the main and junior markets for the week ending Friday, June 14, 2024. 45 made gains, 59 lost value, and 22 stayed the same. 139 million shares changed hands on the Jamaican dollar market, valued at $736 million. Omni Industries finished its first week on JSE as the most traded stock. It took up 18% of market volume with 26 million shares trading. The stock closed the week 10 cents higher than its $1 IPO price. Wigton traded the second highest. The stock gained 2 cents to open Monday at $1.02. And Sagicor Select Funds Financial rounded out last week's most traded with 14 million shares changing hands. The stock gained 6 cents to open Monday at 50 cents. Now let's see who had the biggest gains for the week. Sagicor Select Funds, Manufacturing and Distribution was the market's biggest gainer, up 28%. Cygnus Real Estate USD was the week's second biggest gain, up 25%, and Massey was up 15% to close the week at $97.75. On the losing side now, 138 Student Living Variable Preference was the week's biggest loser. The stock lost 15% to open Monday at $159.70. Cygnus Credit Investments, 10.5% preference shares, had the second biggest dip. The stock also lost 15% to open the new week at $95.45, and ISP Finance lost 15% to close the week at $20.76. Over on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, the composite index gained 10 points or 1% last week. Unilever Caribbean was the most traded stock. The stock lost 69 cents to open Monday at $11.15 TT. Over in the US, the Dow Jones was mostly flat last week, while the S&P 500 was up almost 2% and the Nasdaq was up 3.5%. In foreign exchange, it took an average $156.48 Jamaican to purchase $1 last Friday. That's 8 cents more than the week before. Meanwhile, it took an average $116.02 Jamaican to purchase $1 Canadian. 1 British pound cost on average $200.76 Jamaican. And you could buy €1 for $171.08 Jamaican on average. Finally, on the crypto markets, Bitcoin prices were down 4% over the past 5 days, trading at $65,522 US on Monday. Ethereum prices were down 1%, trading at $3,524 US on Monday.
Do you remember when this happened? Are you interested in using your formula to mentor a group of people who would be able to replicate it to the mass of young interested adults? So lots of people asking if you would be interested in mentoring young Jamaicans right now.
100% Kalilah. So I make you a deal, Kalilah. You put together the forum, and I will turn up.
Well, since then, Michael Lee Chin has mentored 20 people right here on this platform, and we're sending out the call for 5 more. What would you ask a billionaire investor and entrepreneur? Michael Lee Chin is joining us for one more time for the final installment of Ask Mike on June 24. Prepare your questions because we'll be opening applications soon. And remember, members of the Money Mission community will be at the front of the line, so head over to join. Click the link in the description to join the Money Mission community. Let's get this money.
Disclaimer. This is not intended as financial advice. Please consult a licensed financial advisor before making investment decisions.
It's time now for the analysts. So tonight I'm joined by personal finance and business analyst, Uni Abdul.
Hi.
Hi, Uni, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you for joining us. I know it's not your first time, but I'll give you an opportunity just to say a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Uni Abdul. I basically post on my TikTok about personal finance, business-related topics. I'm based here in Guyana. Our Caribbean partner country. So I basically like to speak on these kind of topics. I like to integrate a basic level of economics into my discussions. But moreover, I also come at personal finance from a different angle, right? A lot of people speak a lot on, saving and investing and all that's quite fine. But I like to speak on it from a deeper psychological aspect, because I think that's an unexplored axis, right? That psychological aspect of money, which really underpins all the behavior and subsequent habits, right? And ultimately can determine how wealthy we do become. So that's really my angle.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much again for joining us. So let's talk about the topic for tonight. So Guyana has become the 3rd largest economy in the English-speaking Caribbean due to the rapid development of its oil industry, something that I believe we've covered here before. So, can you give us, an overview of how Guyana has, gotten to this point, right? What would have led to, this growth and now being 3rd after all these years?
Oh, yeah. So, officially, right, we kind of discovered oil in 2015, right? So that's about 9 years ago. All right. And this was during the very start of the David Granger administration. Prior to that, there were exploration activities taking place, especially quite a lot in the 7 to 8 years prior to 2015. But Guyana's history is riddled throughout with oil exploration activities, both in its maritime area and the inland area, more particularly the south of Guyana, has huge oil deposits. But because of the technological the technological limits at the time, they weren't deemed recoverable, or the seismic assessments, all these things, for some reason we never went in. But coming up to today, right, from 2015 to now, we've been able to extract, and I think it averages about $1 billion dollars per year in extraction just from the oil and gas. And obviously that has had a very positive effect. I think I know that for quite a lot, especially us in the Caribbean, because we do social studies in school as part of the primary and secondary curriculum, right? And we learn about our Caribbean neighbors. And unfortunately, Guyana has always been labeled as, one of the not so prosperous of nations in the Caribbean, but our fortunes have certainly changed. obviously in the last 10 years or so, because of the oil and gas. And one thing I think I've said it in my last appearance, and I'll say it again: the rising tide will lift all the ships. All right, so you'll see a lot of discussion regarding the oil economy and the non-oil economy, right? And because of the boost or the creation and subsequent increased size of that oil economy, it has boosted the non-oil economy as well. The last budget, it was reported that almost all non-oil sectors saw high single digit to double digit increases in economic output. So I mean, and obviously, yeah.
Can you name some of those industries? Maybe get a little bit more specific.
Right. So definitely the extractive industries, right? The mining and quarrying sector went up 43.6%. Oil and gold and bauxite 15.7, 57.2. Sugar and rice, which were had seen a very terrible downturn, about 4 or 5 years ago, has now shot up to 66 and 22%. All right, manufacturing, construction is up 23%. The services sector 7%. All right, so it's really been agriculture and all this subsectors under agriculture, aquaculture, rice, forestry, livestock, all those have seen increases as well, double digits.
Okay, so would you say that Guyana has done well at capitalizing on this turn in terms of fortunes, as you say, based on how things used to be versus how they are now?
Good question. The responsible thing to say here is that we really can't tell. It's only been 10 years or 9 years, or whatever the case is, and we can't rest on our laurels just yet. This thing with oil and gas, we're trying to learn a lot from other countries that have had bountiful oil and gas reserves, taken them in and failed. And also we're trying to look at other countries that have had those oil reserves and done well. All right. So we're new. We're still a baby falling down, holding on to the furniture in the living room. That's my honest assessment. Things are going well, it seems, but it's a little too early to say what the future holds, right? I think that's a responsible perspective that we must have. Of course, as you know, the resource curse, we must guard against that. And I think both. I think on the political side of things, right? And of course, at the level of the people, we want to ensure. Because look, at the end of the day, this oil and gas thing will run out. I don't know if it's 40, 50 years from now. If the technology gets better, we could extract more, prolong it for 60 or 70 years. All right. Of course, there's a push to moving to renewable energy. All these things are threats to the total lifetime extraction that we can have. And we must have a medium to long term view of strengthening the non-oil sector, right? Because we don't want to be left empty handed at the end of this, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned the resource curse. I wanted to ask you to explain that a little bit, as somebody may hear that and not really be sure what you're talking about.
Right. So a resource curse, and when we say resource in this setting, we're talking mainly about the oil and gas resource of a country. However, technically speaking, it can apply to any resource that a country makes that is unusually outsized relative to the other parts of the economy. But say you have a country like Guyana that has a massive oil and gas sector of its economy. Over the years and subsequent budgets, we can become highly dependent on those revenues for development, and it sets the benchmark for budgets for all ministries and all spending. And there could be a time where, I'm not saying it's going to happen, right? But you never know. There could be a time in the country's future where those reserves are depleted, or there's mismanagement of it that cannot now support those new benchmarks, and everything just flops, right? So then and there's the other aspect which I didn't get to mention, is that while we're pursuing this oil and gas thing, the country could inadvertently, right, forget about the non-oil economy, not develop it. And when the oil part of it flops, we don't have the non-oil part of it to back us up. So that's really what the resource curse in a very basic way is speaking about.
Okay, interesting. So not to be negative, but what does this surge mean in terms of in potentially negative impacts to either the country's development? You alluded to it just now, maybe ignoring some of the other sectors, maybe spending or borrowing habits might be changing. What are you seeing in terms of what could potentially impact negatively what's happening right now?
Okay, yes. So, I mean, just a little pretext before I answer that. Remember at the start I said that across all non-oil sectors there have been high single digits and double-digit increases. It's a little hard to say if that was from the performance improvements in those sectors, like if things inside it caused that, or if it's from the oil and gas. I suspect quite a lot of it is from the oil and gas rising those other sectors, right? So if that's the assumption we're going to go by, we could see a plateau, right? And then it will really be revealed if those non-oil sectors have been performing well on their own steam, or if they've been propped up because of the oil economy. With that being said, some of the negatives that can come out of this, right, outside of resource courses we just discussed, it could lead to overheating of the economy. Prices can rise too fast, and the salaries may not match up, especially for those of us on the lower end of the salary scale, right? The tail end might drag a little bit. All right, those in the middle and upper class can see salaries go up. Those in the commercial sector can set prices to match the increase in inflation and commodities and stuff, and be okay, right? So that's one thing, right? There's massive spending taking place, and one of the things you alluded to as well, right? Some of the borrowing habits. Certainly, Guyana has it's no secret Guyana has borrowed quite a lot. All right, and I guess that's because our credit rating has improved. All right, I think 2 years ago, I don't remember which organization it was, if it was World Bank or IDB, but we moved from low income to middle income country. I mean, when you think about this on a global scale, to call Guyana a middle income country, and subsequently that translates to better credit rating, meaning that we can access loans of a certain size and percentage interest. All right, how we manage that going forward, because when you put politics into play here, right, you have economists on both sides of the aisle, all right, that understand the economic principles and so forth, but at the end of the day, the people want to get elected, all right, and there's that priority to push out spending in certain parts of the economy. All right, and it may either be short-sighted or medium-sighted or long-sighted. We really don't know what's in the head of these politicians in terms of a long-term planning. I mean, I can only hope that we're doing the right thing. Everything seems to be doing okay, but only time will tell. I want to place a very responsible statement, all right, on what the outlook for Guyana is, because if my fellow Guyanese are watching, all right, whether we ascend into politics later on in life, we should always have our thinking cap on, right? Not bask in the glory of oil and gas. Think about the economy as a whole, and how we're helping our poorest. Our poorest people must, participate in that prosperity.
I see you're being very, very careful as to the words you're using. So that's a good approach. That's a good approach. I see Eileen is asking, what effect does the discovery of oil in Guyana has on their environment? I think that's a very, very good question.
Lovely question. Well, in environment, so definitely there's risk of oil spill. All right, we're boring into the crust of the seabed. All right, things can pop off like they did in the Gulf of Mexico, I think it's 2010 or something like that. Of course, the seismic surveys that they're carrying out on the coast of Guyana, sound waves going through the ocean People don't even think about it, but it's very much amplified and can affect the marine environment, right? The fish population. The sound can scare them away. So that can have an effect on the fishing catch, all right? The volumes of our fishery sector, all right? However, I should note that our fishing sector grew by 15%, all right? So economically, the metric is there to show that it may not have been affected, but keep in mind, I don't know how much of that would have been through aquaculture, right?
It would be interesting to see what's the measurement for growth in that sector. Is that more fish being produced?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
Or
know.
if,
That's an interesting one to measure. Okay.
yeah.
Any closing comments? I say Garvin saying big up Guyana and the oil. Just make sure the development is equitable. Same, I think what you've been saying. I remember when we had just a little theory or rumor of oil in one of our parishes. It was very interesting to see how the public reacted to that. It would really be interesting if Jamaica should ever be in that situation. That's all I'll say about it. But do you want to close out with any comments, Uni, before we wrap up?
I just Leanne Morris Bennett, what
Sorry, yes,
policies?
Leon's question, yeah. What policies are in place to safeguard its economy with this boom? Sorry about that.
No. So I believe we have something called a natural resource fund, which is similarly modeled to the sovereign wealth fund, I believe in Norway, where there are protections and limits put in place, withdrawal limits put in place, right, to prevent excessive removal of money. To be quite honest, I'm not sure as to the technical details of how that is set up and if it's effective. So there's that taking place. I think most of our oil profits are stored in the U.S. Federal Reserve in New York, in some bank account there, and there's also an investment mandate. So there's any money that's left back in the fund. There's an investment strategy that they put in place. So obviously they're not parking the money, doing nothing with it. It's put into different places. So while we're not using it or while we can't access it because of the limit put in place, it can also be put to work to make more money. So those are some of the things. And also built into every Caribbean parliament, right? There's a public accounts committee and all these things. And, of course, all these things can be strengthened over time, right?
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Uni. I've learned so much just from what you've shared over the last few minutes. So I believe persons can reach you with your details in the description. So feel free to support Uni on his TikTok. And I think you're on YouTube as well, I believe.
Dabbling, trying, Kalilah got to teach me some stuff.
I was just gonna say, like, you're in the right place. I'm sure Kalilah can teach you a thing or two. But thank you so much.
Yes, no problem.
All right, so let's take a few comments before we wrap up. All right, let me just call out the ones that I'm seeing here. So we've touched on all the ones with Guyana, but Orville seems to be concerned about digital wallets. So Orville is advising us to be careful. I mean, it's really, I think that it's something that you should always exhibit some amount of caution with, right? So you don't put all your eggs in one basket, literally. So I wouldn't imagine that you'd have your entire wealth on a digital wallet. I'll just say that. But I have seen the technology develop over the years. So I think it's relatively something that's tried, proven, and tested by now, Orville. So I'm not sure what your concern is. And I see Garvin asking you the same thing, right? Leanne is saying for our poll question A, B, and D. Which one was C? C is nothing. Okay, so you're open to it, Leanne. That's cool. And how good is the security? I really couldn't answer that one for you. It would be good to know. I think that would help persons make the decision. I think that's something that Kalilah can probably visit in terms of a question at some point. I'm almost certain that maybe when it was just advertised, something would have been there about it, I'm sure, about its security and and how that all works, right? Orville is saying, who do you think control all these platforms and technologies? I'm not sure, Orville. Maybe you can tell us, because I don't know who. And Sean is saying, I wonder how Jamaica's oil exploration is going. So, Sean, as I said before, I thought there was some, I don't know which parish it was in, but there was thought of maybe we found oil or something like that. And it was so interesting to see just the conversation on social media about it. And the final comment I'll take is that Sean says the digital wallet needs to be better than a Visa card. Better in what sense? Give us some more context there. All right. So, okay, we're going to take a quick break.
Butterfly in the sky. What? I can go twice as high.
So if this is you, download my free e-guide right now, Financial Terms Made Simple. It's a list of 40 commonly used financial terms broken down into simple language. Because don't you just hate when you look up a word and it gives you an even bigger word as a definition? So this is not that. I've made it as easy as possible so you can just whip it out and use it as a quick reference when you hear a term that you don't really understand. That way you don't miss investment opportunities because you were too embarrassed to ask what a bond is or what an IPO is. Let's get this money.
All right, so we've come to the end of this week's show. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks again to Economist Keenan Falconer and personal finance and business analyst Uni Abdul for joining us. So be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you're new, and share it with a friend. Also, please subscribe to the newsletter at KalilahReynolds.com/newsletter. Be sure to turn on post notifications so that you can be the first to see all of the features, news, and updates that come straight from this channel. We want to help people to learn more about money so we can all get this money together. So be sure to follow Kalilah on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Kalilah Ray. This is her only account. She does not have any backup accounts. So please continue to report any scammers and impersonators whenever you see them. And be sure to follow me on Instagram at Learn Grow Invest. The same for all platforms, TikTok as well. I'd love to connect with you at any time. If you want to connect with any of our guests and the analysts, check the description box for their information. And also be sure to visit KalilahReynolds.com for any financial information you can use, however you like to watch, listen, or read. So finally, be sure to tell a friend about taking stock. Investing is the new sexy. So let's make it cool to talk about money. I'm Jermaine McDonald, and thanks for watching.